When the lawyer read my husband's will, the room went silent, so quiet I could hear the hum of the ceiling fan and the faint tick of his gold wristwatch still lying on the table beside the papers. Everything, every house, every share, every account, had gone to our children. Not a single line bore my name. I remember gripping the armrest of my chair, trying to steady the tremor in my fingers. I'd been his wife for 32 years, his confidant, his shadow through every business deal, every triumph, every late-night panic. And yet, in death, Daniel had left me with nothing but a folded note sealed in an ivory envelope. "For you," the lawyer said softly, sliding it across the polished oak table. I didn't open it right away. I couldn't. My sons, Ethan and Lucas, sat on the other side, their expressions unreadable. They looked so much like him in that moment, sharp, composed, untouchable. I wondered if they'd known. I used to think love guaranteed understanding. But as I sat there, under the weight of Daniel's final decision, I realized how little I truly knew the man I'd shared my life with. Daniel Kensington was the kind of man people described with reverence. Billionaire, visionary, philanthropist. The newspapers painted him as a self-made genius, the kind who turned steel and sweat into empires. But behind closed doors, he was quiet, methodical, sometimes distant, yet always affectionate in the ways that mattered. He'd bring me coffee every morning, just the way I liked it, black, 2 sugars, no spoon. He'd touch my hand during dinner, small gestures that said, "I see you." And now he was gone. The funeral had been lavish, too lavish. Reporters, investors, old friends with crocodile smiles. But what haunted me wasn't the ceremony, it was the stillness afterward. Coming home to a house too large for one heartbeat. His scent still lingering on his coats. His office door always ajar, now locked. I stared at that envelope for hours after everyone left. When I finally tore it open, expecting closure or comfort, I found only a single line written in his familiar cursive. "Forgive me, Margaret. You'll understand soon." Forgive him? For what? That night, I lay awake replaying every moment of our life together, every argument, every decision, every time he'd said, "Trust me." I thought I had, but as the shadows stretched across our empty bed, one thought refused to leave me. If Daniel had loved me the way I believed he did, why would he leave me out of everything? And just like that, grief began to twist into something darker, an ache sharpened by betrayal and the haunting need to uncover what my husband had truly taken with him to the grave. Daniel and I met when I was 23, working as a junior analyst at a small financial firm in New York. He was already building his empire then. Confident, magnetic, a man who commanded attention without raising his voice. He noticed me during a late-night presentation, where my nervous hands fumbled with the projector. Instead of laughing, he'd offered to help, his smile disarming and deliberate. By the end of that week, I was sitting across from him at a candlelit restaurant, wondering how someone so self-assured could make me feel completely seen. We married a year later. I left my job at his request. "You don't need to work, Maggie," he'd said. "You deserve to live, not chase spreadsheets." At the time, it sounded like love. Looking back, it feels more like the first stone in the wall that slowly rose between us. Our life together glittered on the surface. Charity galas, magazine covers, lavish vacations, all the trappings of success. But behind closed doors, Daniel changed. He became consumed by his company, Kensington Industries, and I, in turn, became the caretaker of our world, the children, the home, the image. Ethan, our eldest, was always his father's shadow. Reserved, analytical, with that same cool detachment Daniel wore, like armor. Lucas, 3 years younger, had more of me in him. Curious, expressive, endlessly questioning. I'd hoped that would protect him from his father's world. But money is its own language, and both my sons were fluent long before they were old enough to understand its weight. As the years passed, I learned to measure love in silence. The way Daniel would brush his hand against mine before a public event, the rare smiles we shared after the guests had gone. I told myself that this was what partnership looked like when ambition took the front seat. Then came the illness. It arrived like a shadow we pretended not to see. He hid the severity from everyone, even from me. By the time the doctors used the word terminal, it was already too late for treatment, too late for honesty. In those final months, Daniel spoke less and worked more. He locked himself in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers and sealed folders. He refused visitors, even the boys. He said he was restructuring the company, but when I pressed him, he'd only say, "You'll understand one day." I remember standing outside that door, listening to the sound of him coughing, of pens scratching against paper, and thinking how strange it was that the man I'd built my life with had become a stranger. And now, staring at that one-line letter, I realized that whatever he'd been doing behind that door wasn't business. It was preparing for this moment, for a future where I would be cut out entirely.
But why?
What had I done to deserve being erased from the story I helped build? That question, more than grief itself, was what began to eat away at me. For weeks after the will was read, I moved through the house like a ghost. The estate felt unfamiliar. Every polished surface, every distant echo reminded me that I was no longer its mistress, but an uninvited guest haunting her own life. My sons came and went, always polite, always distant. Ethan took charge of everything: the lawyers, the media, the companies. Lucas, ever the peacemaker, stopped by with flowers and that apologetic smile I'd once found so endearing. But even he couldn't meet my eyes when I asked the one question I couldn't silence. "Did your father tell you about the will before he died?" Lucas hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "He mentioned he was making changes. Said it was for the best." "For the best," I repeated, my voice thinner than I expected. "For whom?" He didn't answer. And in that silence, I heard the truth. Days turned into restless nights. I began going through Daniel's things, his files, his journals, anything that might explain why he'd done this. Most of his office was untouched since his death, everything arranged with the same meticulous order he'd always insisted on. Except for one drawer, locked tight. It took me 3 days to find the key, hidden inside an old cigar box, beneath a pile of letters I didn't recognize. Inside the drawer were legal documents, investment reports, and something far more personal, a folder labeled Margaret. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Me over the years, at charity events, with the boys as children, sitting alone on park benches. Some were candid, taken from angles that made me wonder who'd been behind the lens. At the bottom was a letter, unsent, addressed to me in his handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I've gone through with it. I know you'll feel betrayed, but I need you to understand. What I've done is to protect you." Protect me? From what? The next morning, I went to see our lawyer, Mr. Adler. He was an old friend of Daniel's, a man whose loyalty had always been to my husband, never to me.
"Still, I had to try."
"Daniel left me nothing," I said, placing the note on his desk. "He says he did it to protect me." "What does that mean?" Adler sighed, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Kensington, your husband made certain arrangements. There were debts, quiet ones, business obligations. Transferring the assets to your sons ensured that nothing could be legally seized from you." Debts. I frowned. Daniel was a billionaire. "On paper, yes," Adler said carefully. "But not all fortunes are what they appear to be. He'd invested heavily in offshore ventures, risky ones. When his health declined, he moved everything to your sons' names. He didn't want you entangled in the fallout."
His words struck like a slap.
For years, I'd believed Daniel's empire was built on solid ground. Now I wasn't sure if I'd been living in a castle or a house of cards. When I left the office, the autumn air felt sharper. I should have felt relief, knowing Daniel's motives weren't cruel. But something about Adler's explanation didn't sit right. The timing, the secrecy, the photographs. Why would Daniel document me, watch me, protect me from something unnamed? That night, I confronted Ethan. He was in Daniel's study, sitting behind his father's desk as though it already belonged to him. "Your father left everything to you," I said quietly. And he said it was to protect me. What aren't you telling me, Ethan? He looked up, expression unreadable. Mom, you don't need to worry about this. Dad handled everything. Just let it go. But I saw it then. Something flicker across his face.
Guilt. Fear.
Maybe both. I realized Daniel hadn't just left me out of his will. He'd left me a trail. And my sons, my own flesh and blood, might be part of the secret he died trying to keep. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's handwriting. Forgive me, Margaret. You'll understand soon. Understand what? That my husband had stripped me of everything to protect me? That my children, the same boys I had raised, loved, and fought for, were hiding something behind practiced smiles? At dawn, I went back into Daniel's study. The smell of cedar and old paper clung to the air, like time itself refused to move forward. I ran my hand along the mahogany desk, searching for meaning in the silence. That's when I noticed a small keyhole hidden behind a drawer handle. It took hours of searching before I found the matching key, taped to the back of a framed photograph of the four of us, taken at our summer home years ago. My throat tightened as I unlocked the compartment and pulled out a slim black folder marked simply with one word: truth. Inside were documents that made my pulse quicken: bank transfers, signed agreements, offshore accounts. But what froze me wasn't the numbers. It was the name listed under primary beneficiary, Ethan Kensington. And below it another signature, Lucas's. At first, I thought it was a misunderstanding. But as I turned the pages, realization came in waves so cold it burned. Daniel hadn't just given them his fortune. He'd been forced to. There were letters of demand, threats, even from a private equity firm Daniel had partnered with years ago. The company had collapsed, and in its wake, left a trail of lawsuits and criminal allegations. If Daniel's assets had stayed in his name, or mine, they would have been seized, investigated, ruined. By transferring everything to our sons before his death, he'd hidden the money in plain sight. But there was more. A letter addressed to me, dated 2 weeks before he passed. My dearest Margaret, I know this looks cruel, but I had no choice. Ethan made decisions I could no longer undo. He got involved with men who don't forgive easily, people who now control what's left of Kensington Industries. I've signed everything away to protect you from them. You must never ask the boys about this. If you do, they'll know you've found the truth. Please, for your safety, pretend ignorance. Forgive me for leaving you in the dark. It's the only way I can keep you safe. I sat there, numb, staring at the words until they blurred.
Ethan.
My eldest. My pride. My mirror of Daniel. He hadn't just inherited his father's company, he'd inherited his mistakes.
A knock startled me.
Lucas stood in the doorway, pale, eyes glistening with something between fear and relief. Mom, he whispered, you found it, didn't you? I nodded. He stepped inside and closed the door. Dad didn't want to hurt you. Ethan, he got mixed up in things he couldn't control. After Dad found out, he tried to fix it quietly. But when his health declined, he knew he wouldn't have time. Tears welled up unbidden. So, he sacrificed everything for us. Lucas nodded, voice breaking. And Ethan's been trying to hold it together ever since. The money, the deals, they're not really ours. They belong to people who could destroy everything if they knew Dad's gone. The room tilted slightly as the truth settled in. Daniel hadn't betrayed me. He died carrying the weight of our son's mistake. And my inheritance wasn't money. It was survival. I sank into Daniel's chair, clutching his letter. He wanted me to stay out of it, I murmured. Lucas's voice was almost a plea. You still can, Mom. Just let it go. Please. But I couldn't. Because love, real love, isn't silence. It's facing the truth, no matter how much it hurts. And I finally understood what Daniel's note meant. Forgive me. He wasn't asking for forgiveness for what he did. He was asking forgiveness for what I would now have to do. For days, I lived in quiet paralysis, moving through the house like someone inhabiting a stranger's life. Every room whispered a different version of Daniel's love, his guilt, his impossible choices. I kept his letter folded in my pocket, reading it until the edges wore soft, as if repetition could dull the ache of understanding. Ethan stopped coming by. Lucas said he was handling things, which, in our world, meant cleaning up whatever truth was too dangerous to surface. I didn't ask where he went. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The world outside still saw the Kensingtons as untouchable. The media painted us as the perfect heirs to a lost empire, a grieving widow, 2 brilliant sons, and a legacy of success. No one saw the cracks spiderwebbing beneath the surface. No one knew that our fortune was both armor and curse. One evening, I found myself in Daniel's office again, standing by the window where the city lights stretched endlessly into the horizon. For the first time, I didn't feel angry, just tired. He'd built everything with his bare hands, and in the end, it slipped through his fingers like water. Yet, in his final act, he'd managed to do what he always did best: protect what mattered most, even if it meant breaking my heart to do it. I took out the envelope and wrote a new letter, my own. Daniel, you were right. I understand now. You built a wall to shield me, but you forgot that love doesn't thrive behind walls, it withers. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I still love the man who brought me coffee every morning and believed he could outthink the world. As for our sons, I'll protect them, too, but not with silence. They'll learn that wealth doesn't wash away sins, and that secrets, no matter how noble, eventually demand the light. I sealed the letter and placed it in the hidden compartment where his once lay. It felt like closing a circle, the kind that only grief can draw. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, a faint, forgiving light spilling across the city Daniel had conquered. I watched it for a long time, and for the first time since his death, I felt something shift inside me. Not peace exactly, but acceptance. Maybe that was all Daniel ever wanted for me, to understand that love and loss are not opposites, but reflections of each other. And in that reflection, I finally saw myself, not as the widow of a billionaire, but as the last keeper of his truth.